Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This is the final session, number 10, on my personal philosophy. I hope that you've been able to follow along and understand the importance of what I'm trying to communicate, in that we need to be armed, we need to be solid, we need to formulate our own personal philosophy and grid so that we are not tossed to and fro, and that we're not fallen overboard, or that we don't lose our personal faith because of somebody else's ideas. Because we all function from a basis of faith, and it just depends on what faith you decide to embrace. A faith with God, with a personal God, or faith with an impersonal God, or faith without God. They're all positions taken by faith, and I just hope that you've seen that through this progression of building a personal philosophy, that it has a lot of choices in it that we make, a lot of choices to either accept or reject certain positions. And so that's what we need to do. We need to make the choices, and then we need to follow through and be consistent with those choices. Again, back to the quote by Stephen Jay Gould. First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. But theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. Those four factors: theory, habit, prejudice, and culture. What we've seen is culture, what we've seen is prejudice, what we've seen is theory, and now what we're looking at is habit. And that is something that we've already entered into, but it's a habit of way of seeing things. It's a habitual way of forming our model of how we believe reality to be like. And so we form our model of origins. We form our model of science. We form our model of politics. We form our model of economics. We form our model of religion, of God. And so that is the habit, the habitual way of seeing things. So now we've covered all four factors that Stephen Jay Gould mentions. And they're in the house product. What we now have is the last point in philosophy, which is axiology. What is axiology? Axiology has to do with value, has to do with ethics. It has to do with meaning in life. What gives my life meaning? Well, I would get that from my source of reliable knowledge. What does Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14 say? He says, the preacher says, "This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, with every hidden thing, with whether it is good or whether it is evil." So that is my center of axiology. What gives my life meaning? One is that this is the end of all things. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. What is my duty? Well, I have been created. I have a creator. Therefore, I am subject to the will and purpose of my creator. I am to fulfill what is my duty, what is the whole duty of man, and that is to fear God and keep his commandments. A lot of people live as if they have no purpose, no direction, that their life is an accident anyway. And so it's kind of like, well, that is what you have, or people have adopted because of their philosophical system. But I choose to believe that there exists a God, there exists, and he created me, and that he has a purpose for my life. Therefore, my axiology reflects those values, that belief system, that I do have a purpose. And what is the purpose? The purpose is the duty of man. I have a duty, and that is to fulfill the purpose and to fear God and to glorify him. What gives my life meaning? Well, that has been a subject of many men, many people, men and women. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That comes from the Westminster Shorter Catechism. That was developed. Why are we here? What is my purpose? What am I to do? And this sums it up. Man's chief end is what? Is pleasure, happiness, contentment, feeling fulfilled. He who dies with the most toys wins. That's one philosophy, but that is not the one I chose. I choose to follow a biblical philosophy which has a biblical purpose, and it has a biblical chief end to it. It has a biblical axiology, which is man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Satisfaction is not attained through toys. When we die, if that was our chief end, we leave all the toys behind for others to try to enjoy. But really, those with the most toys, did they really die contented? Did they really die fulfilled if that was their philosophy? He who with the most toys dies with most toys wins. Man's chief end is to glorify God. You want to know what to do? You want to know what our purpose is? If God has created us, our purpose is to understand that we have been created, to understand what is man's duty, to understand what God created us for and why we are all so different. We are also different to fulfill a different purpose in life. We're not all cut out to be the same and fulfill the same thing. We are cut out to enjoy God, to enjoy His purpose, to enjoy His pleasures, enjoy His presence. And that is man's chief end. Going back to the house. We have now completed the house structure. We've gone from welt-bild, which is culture, to epistemology, to sources, to reliable knowledge, to basic beliefs, which come from our metaphysics, which then imply methods to get to our reliable knowledge. How do we get reliable knowledge? That is our methods from epistemology, to our logic. What is logical? Well, then goes to axiology, to what is our value. What purpose do we have in living? And so now our house is complete. And it goes up the side of worldview, or the world concepts, the welt-bild, which is the culture, the Weltanschauung, which relates to the theory of looking out after we have built the whole system to look out with, and then Welt-model, which is producing a model that we look at the world habitually through, and then we come to our values and our ethics. What governs what we do, what we act like, and how we serve. That's the whole series. We have now completed the whole series on building a biblical worldview, philosophical house of how to respond and how to understand, how to think, how to filter all ideas that are out there. I just hope that this has been something that is able to equip you to understand and to stand firm. Understand, seeing, and stand firm by the belief system that you choose to stand by. Again, do we understand this saying? First facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. But theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. Those four factors have been incorporated now through the house diagram. Incorporating those 4 factors, we personalize it, and we take ownership of culture, of prejudice, of theory, and of habits. Those all form who we are and what we think and where we end up. There's a saying that I've learned kind of the hard way. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I've had to learn that. Is that when we transport ourselves to another culture, we need to act and live as that culture acts and lives if we're to be successful integrant into that culture. And for one example I might give, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in Bolivia, drive as the Bolivians do. And it's kind of like, you can't do that. That would be violating the law. And it's kind of like, okay, the laws are there to protect us. If you apply certain laws in Bolivia on certain days at certain times of the night, it could be very dangerous and it would not be helpful nor protecting of you. And what was one of those laws? Well, one of the things that I had to get used to that I was not is the stoplight, the red, the yellow, and the green. And that for me, they had a fixed value, and this is what they meant, and that's what you did. Well, in Bolivia being more practical and practicing things that were useful, those stoplights worked during the day and in the evening on busy hours. But if you're at night and there's nobody coming and there's nobody to control, then why stop? So that's what I had learned. Because if you didn't have traffic coming this way and there was no traffic coming this way, but there was traffic behind me, I better not stop. If it was Saturday night and if it was late, just keep going right through the light, because the light was only there to serve me. I was not there to serve the light. At least that was what my Bolivian friends did in Bolivia. And so translated this thing, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. What that means is culture and how much of an influence that has, and the necessity and the importance of understanding the culture I am currently living in. To not be an offense, to be able to communicate, I need to do as the Romans do. Now this was in a letter that was sent from St. Ambrose to Augustine. And why? Because Augustine was the bishop now. He'd been reassigned to Rome. And it's kind of like previously, I think he was in Milan. And in Milan, the church practiced different things church-wise. That they did not eat on Saturday before Sunday. They practiced abstention. They practiced. And so when he goes to Rome, they're eating and they're drinking, and Augustine says to Ambrose, what do I do? Because they're not doing what they did in Milan. And so Ambrose very I think intelligently responded by saying, when you are in Rome, you do as the Romans do. When you are in Milan, you do as the Milaneses. No, that would be ketchup, mayonnaise in Spanish. But anyway, what do the Milans do? Then do as they do. So culture was a very important part. But culture has its boundaries. And so in other words, we don't leave everything behind when we go to another culture. We still need to bring in the truth. And the truth is not bound by cultural differences or changed by cultural differences, but the perspectives of that truth, yes, can change. But here's another one. It says, what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? This was another cultural comment that was made by an early church father, Tertullian. And what his point was that how can we as church fathers apply Greek Western thinking to biblical parameters? We are changing and corrupting those biblical parameters of which the Hebrews came up with by applying Athens' way of thinking to Jerusalem documents. So that was an interesting quote from Tertullian. What hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? And what does that mean? Greek philosophy came from the Greek center of Athens. The Hebrew thinking is centered in the temple of Jerusalem. So his question is, what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? In other words, what hath Western philosophy and Greek thinking have to do with Hebrew, non-Western cultural documents? We need to understand that difference. Back to the house. We're finished. We're done. I hope that it's understood. I hope that it made sense. I hope that you can take this information and, led by the Holy Spirit, construct your house. Construct your fort, your fortress that will hold up against, but it must be built upon the rock. It must be built upon Jesus Christ. If not, if it's built on sand, when other ideas, when other pressures come, the house is going to fall. The only house that will stay strong and stay standing is the house built upon the rock. And that rock is Jesus Christ. That is what we must build upon. But understanding culture, understanding epistemology, understanding source of reliable knowledge, basic beliefs, metaphysics, our methods, our logic, our axiology, I hope now that those big terms or those terms aren't mysterious, but that they've been explained in a way that we can grasp them, we can put them to use, and we can defend ourselves and maintain our own standpoint by developing our own system. Again, I hope this has been useful. What we've done is just shared with you what we have gone through in the last number of years of having to develop my personal philosophy and then defend it within the state university. And so my hope is that we as Christians develop a thought system that is consistent with what we say we believe. And that is what is necessary, because there is a lot of antichrists that have come into the world, that have come into the church, that have come into the seminaries. And they are blaspheming Christ by their handling of revelation and of saying that we no longer need it, or there isn't any. Christ said that there's going to be many that come after him, and to be careful. We need to equip ourselves to be able to identify and be able to reject those that would rob us of our faith by their philosophy, by the philosophy of men, and not by the philosophy of Christ. I hope, again, that this has been a help. We're Tim and Holly. You're welcome to communicate with us through the following addresses. This is the end of this series, number 10, on building my personal philosophy. Thank you for joining.